The text came just as the gavel fell. I was still gripping the edge of the courtroom table when my phone buzzed one vibration that felt like it cracked the world in half. I didn't even check the screen until I stumbled into the courthouse bathroom. The echo of footsteps, the slam of a door, then silence. Only the hiss of fluorescent lights and the sharp smell of disinfectant. I wiped a hand across my face and finally looked. Your DNA results are in. The woman you call mother shares 0 genetic markers with you. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. For a moment, everything went still, the air, the sound, even the part of me that still believed life made sense. Then the toilet in the next stall flushed, and the noise broke the silence like thunder. I leaned against the sink, palms flat on the cool porcelain, staring into the mirror. The man in it looked familiar and foreign all at once. Pale skin, jaw, tight eyes that had seen too much. That's me, I thought, or whoever I was 5 minutes ago. My name is Jonathan Price. 38, born and raised in Cedar Falls, Colorado. I used to be a mechanical engineer. The kind of man who fixed broken things, tractors, air compressors, even church bells when the local repairmen gave up. I built my shop with my own hands. I paid my taxes, mowed my mother's lawn, and believed in the quiet dignity of work. And now apparently I'd built all that on a lie. Only an hour ago I sat across from Margaret Price, the woman I'd called Mom for 38 years, as she signed her will, leaving every cent of her $190 million estate to a man named Gregory Lane. She called him my only son. My name never left her lips. The fluorescent light above flickered. My reflection blurred. I swallowed hard, trying to keep down the storm rising in my chest. 0 genetic markers. Words so cold they didn't sound human. A soft knock came at the door. Sir, you doing okay? It was Lacey Harmon, the court clerk. Her voice carried the uneasy warmth of someone who had seen too many breakdowns in that building. I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't. My voice didn't sound like mine. She lingered a second, then walked away. The door shut, and the silence folded back around me. Another buzz. A second message appeared beneath the first. If you want to know the truth about who you are, call me. MD. My thumb hovered over the screen. MD, a name. A warning I didn't know. Outside, someone called for order. The sound of a gavel echoed through the tiled walls, dull and final. I stared at the stranger in the mirror and whispered, if she's not my mother, then who am I? The reflection didn't answer, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure it ever would. When I finally stepped out of the courthouse, Denver's air felt sharper than I remembered, cold, almost surgical. I stood on the stone steps, phone still in my hand, the messages burning into my palm. For a long time, I just watched people drift past, their lives intact, their worlds unshaken. Mine was unraveling thread by thread. I thought of her then, Margaret Price, the woman who raised me. To anyone who knew her, she was the portrait of quiet virtue. The kind of woman small towns in Colorado still talk about with a certain nostalgia, a widow who never remarried, who baked lemon pies for the church fundraiser, who kept a modest garden of lilacs and mint, because she said the smell of them made her feel closer to heaven. She lived in a weather-beaten house at the edge of Cedar Falls, where the wind from the Rockies would rattle the loose shutters in winter. Every Sunday, I drove over for dinner, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and her overcooked green beans. She'd pour sweet tea into the same chipped glasses she'd used since I was a boy and say, "You work too hard, Johnny. A man needs to rest sometimes." She always said she didn't need much. I have everything I want: my son, my home, and my faith. Those words used to warm me. Now they ring hollow like a hymn sung out of habit. She clipped coupons religiously, kept stacks of Better Homes and Gardens magazines from the 80s. Her car, a dented Ford Taurus, was older than some of my employees. And I believed all of it. Every gesture of frugality, every sigh about hospital bills, every time she told me, "Money doesn't buy peace, sweetheart." My father, she said, had died when I was 6, a truck driver crushed under his own rig during a snowstorm near Pueblo. She said it gently, as if pain could be softened by kindness. I never questioned it. I built my life around her grief, made it my duty to give her the stability she'd lost. But standing there on the courthouse steps, watching clouds gather over the city, I realized how carefully she'd written that story. Every humble detail, every hardship, it all fit too perfectly, like furniture arranged to hide a stain on the carpet. A flash of memory surfaced the year I turned 12, finding her burning a stack of old photographs in the metal bin behind our house. I'd asked whose they were. She said, "Just people who don't matter anymore." Her eyes had glistened, and I'd felt guilty for asking. Now I wondered whose faces had been in those flames. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. I slipped the phone into my pocket and started walking toward the parking lot, my shoes clicking against the pavement. If the woman who raised me wasn't my mother, then every act of love, every sacrifice, every memory, was it all theater? Or worse, was it all part of something much darker? Either way, the story she'd told me for 38 years was starting to come apart. And somewhere behind that gentle smile and Sunday prayers, there was a truth she never meant for me to find. For weeks after the courthouse, I went through the motions of living the life I'd built, showing up at the shop, fixing what was broken, pretending I still belonged to the rhythm of ordinary days. That's the thing about small towns like Cedar Falls. They move at their own pace, slow and steady, as if nothing truly terrible can touch them. My repair shop sat just off Highway 83, a squat metal building that always smelled like oil sawdust and old coffee. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I started it with 2 second-hand tools and a dream my mother said would never work. "People will always need something fixed," I told her, and she smiled the way mothers do when they want to believe. By the time I turned 35, I had 3 full-time employees, a line of loyal farmers who trusted me with their tractors and hay balers, and a bank account that finally stayed out of the red. I liked the hum of engines, the scrape of metal, the way sunlight cut through the dust in the morning like gold threads. It was honest work, the kind that leaves your hands rough, but your conscience clean. Every evening, I came home to Emily Carter. She taught history at the local high school, the kind of teacher who stayed after class to help the kid everyone else had given up on. She wore her hair in a loose bun, laughed with her whole face, and believed that small kindnesses could still change the world. We'd sit on the porch after dinner, her legs tucked under her, my boots kicked off beside the steps. She'd talk about wanting a garden, a dog, a child. I'd nod, picturing it all, the house, the laughter, the smell of tomato vines in the sun. That was our dream, something simple, something we could grow together. Behind the house along the fence line, I planted wild daisies. They didn't need much, just a little rain, a little light. Emily teased me about them. "You pick the stubborn ones," she said. "Maybe that's why you like them." She didn't know they reminded me of my mother, Margaret, who used to say daisies survive because they don't expect much from the world. Back then, I thought it was wisdom. Now I wonder if it was warning. My best friend, Derek Morales, worked with me since the early days, when it was just 2 guys, a borrowed truck, and a pile of debts. Derek was blunt, always had been. One afternoon, wiping grease off his hands, he told me, "John, you gotta stop saving everybody. Someday you'll fix the wrong thing and it'll break you." I laughed it off. He was wrong, I thought. Fixing things was what I did best. But standing in that same shop now with the hum of machines and the smell of gasoline, I realized he was right. I'd spent my whole life fixing engines, fences, and hearts, everything but the truth. And like those daisies behind my house, the truth had been growing all along, quiet and stubborn, waiting for the right moment to break through the dirt. The first snow of December had just started to fall when the call came. I remember the glow of the streetlight outside my window, flakes tumbling in slow spirals, the kind of quiet that makes you think the world's holding its breath. I'd been half asleep, one arm draped across Emily's empty side of the bed. She was away visiting her parents in Kansas. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. 2:14 a.m. No one good ever calls at that hour. I almost let it ring out, but something in my chest told me to answer. Jonathan. Her voice rasped, thin and trembling. I'm at Denver General. The doctors say it's cancer. Pancreatic. Stage 3. For a moment, all I could hear was the whir of the ceiling fan, slow and steady, like it was counting down something I didn't want to name. I'll be right there, I said, already grabbing my jeans, my boots. The drive through the empty streets felt unreal, the traffic lights blinking on and off like they couldn't decide whether to stop me or let me go. At the hospital, the smell of antiseptic hit first. Then the sight of her Margaret in a paper gown that made her skin look translucent. Dr. Alan Pierce was the kind of man who didn't waste words. He walked me through the scans with a calm voice that made the news sound almost routine. Pancreatic carcinoma locally advanced. Standard treatment 6 months of chemopalliative in nature. But, he paused, glancing up. There's an experimental trial at Johns Hopkins. Targeted immunotherapy. High risk but promising. How promising, I asked. He hesitated. 40% remission rate. And the cost? He didn't soften it. Roughly $650,000 not covered by insurance. Margaret reached for my hand before I could speak. No, Jonathan. Absolutely not. I won't let you do that. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time I noticed how small her hand felt in mine, like something already letting go. Mom, I said, forcing a smile, don't worry about the money. We'll find a way. She shook her head, voice cracking. If I die, who's going to tell you the truth? The words hung there, fragile, almost drowned out by the hum of the heart monitor. I thought she meant the truth about life, about faith, something poetic people say when they're scared. I didn't realize it was a confession wrapped in disguise. I drove her home that morning after the tests, the city still half asleep under the snow. Emily called when she woke up. I told her the news. There was a long silence on the line before she said, John, you can't throw away everything for a 40% chance. If it were your mother, I whispered. What would you do? She didn't answer. The only sound was the faint hum of static, like the space between us was growing wider by the second. By dawn, I'd already made up my mind. Some things you fix because you can. Others because you can't live with yourself if you don't try. By the next week, I was sitting at my kitchen table long after midnight papers spread out like fallen leaves, mortgage statements, retirement accounts, a handwritten list of every tool in my shop with a price scribbled beside it. The glow of the desk lamp threw long shadows across the walls, the kind you only see when a house is too quiet. Emily stood in the doorway, arms folded, her hair pulled back from a face that used to light up when I walked in. You're really doing this? She said, more a statement than a question. I have to. I whispered, eyes fixed on the numbers that still didn't add up. She stepped closer, set something on the table, a small velvet box. Inside lay the ring she'd worn for the past 2 years. You love ghosts more than you love me, she said softly. Call me when you're ready to live with the living. Then she was gone. The door clicking shut behind her, like a period at the end of a sentence. I sold the shop first. Derek tried to talk me out of it. John, you built this with your own hands. You can't just give it away. It's not giving it away, I said, signing the papers. It's buying time. The buyer was quick, a man from Boulder, with cash in hand. 3 days later, my workshop, the smell of oil and sawdust, the hum of compressors belonged to someone else. The house went next, sold under market to a family moving in from Nebraska. I packed my clothes into 2 suitcases, loaded them into my dented pickup, and drove the last load to Margaret's house. By then, the truck itself was already listed online. I moved into the small spare room off her kitchen, the one that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. The walls were thin enough that I could hear her at night whispering on the phone to someone, then falling silent when she realized I was still awake. Every morning at 6, I helped her dress and drove her to Denver General for treatment. Every evening at 8, I brought her home, her skin a little grayer, her hands a little colder. Our neighbor, Ruth Henderson, was often out on her porch in a worn cardigan, sipping tea from a mason jar. She'd watch me lift Margaret carefully into the car, then shake her head. One morning she called out, "You're a good son, Jonathan. But sometimes God tests us wearing the mask of the devil." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and closed the door. Nights blurred together, hospital corridors, invoices, half-eaten sandwiches on the dashboard. I stopped checking my phone for messages from Emily. Eventually, they stopped coming. By autumn, the only thing I still owned outright was my name. And even that was starting to feel borrowed. I told myself this was what love looked like: sacrifice without condition, duty without rest. But sometimes, lying awake in that cedar-scented room, I wondered if I was saving her life, or just slowly losing mine. 6 months later, the doctors called it a miracle. The tumor had shrunk to nearly nothing. The scans came back clear, and Dr. Pierce, who'd spent the better part of half a year managing my panic, finally smiled for the first time. "She's beaten the odds," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You did good, son." But as the cancer disappeared, so did the woman I thought I knew. The first change was small, subtle even. Margaret started dressing differently. Gone were the flannel robes and bargain sweaters from the thrift store. Suddenly she was wearing silk blouses and gold earrings I'd never seen before. I told myself it was just her way of celebrating life, of feeling whole again after months in hospital gowns. But then came the perfume. Something expensive, something that didn't belong in a house that still smelled faintly of bleach and soup. Next came the phone calls. Late at night, behind the closed door of her bedroom, her voice low and urgent. The moment she heard the floorboard creak under my foot, she'd stop talking. Sometimes I'd catch her sitting in the kitchen afterward, staring at her reflection in the dark window, as if she was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. Then, there were the envelopes. Thick, cream-colored, always arriving from New York. One morning I picked one up from the porch when she wasn't home. The return address read, Frederick Holt and Associates, Manhattan, NY. The letter inside was addressed to Mrs. Margaret Lane. Lane. The name struck me like a faint echo of thunder. I'd heard it before, Gregory Lane. The man she'd called her real son at the will hearing. When I asked her about it that evening, she didn't even blink. "It's just a clerical mistake," she said, her tone calm, practiced. "People mix up names all the time." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Not long after, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. A tall man in a tailored suit stepped out, his shoes too polished for Cedar Falls. "Frederick Holt," the embossed card said. "Financial advisor," he introduced himself. He was polite. Too polite, the kind of man who never answered a question directly. I stood at the window as they talked in the living room, her posture rigid, his head tilted just enough to look like authority disguised as concern. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw her laugh, a soft, unfamiliar laugh, that didn't sound like gratitude. Later that night, I found a new leather briefcase tucked under her bed filled with documents and handwritten notes. The top page read, "Estate transfer draft pending signature." When she caught me looking, she didn't yell. She just sighed and said, "Jonathan, sometimes we do things that don't make sense until much later." Then she turned off the light and left me standing there, holding a truth I couldn't yet name. That night, for the first time since the cancer, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how miracles sometimes heal the body, but uncover the sickness of the soul. And as the wind rattled the shutters, I had the terrible feeling that my mother was preparing to leave me, not for death this time, but for something far worse. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of gray morning when even the sun seems reluctant to show up. Margaret asked me to drive her to Denver, said she had a meeting about the estate. I assumed it was another follow-up with Frederick Holt, her lawyer from New York. I didn't want to go, but something in her voice, steady, deliberate, made it clear I didn't have a choice. The office was on the top floor of a glass tower downtown, the kind of place that smells like money and disinfectant. I held the door for her, and for a moment, watching her step inside, I realized I didn't recognize the woman I was following. She walked differently now, straighter, prouder, almost untouchable. Inside, Holt was already waiting. His suit looked like it cost more than my truck used to. "Mrs. Lane," he greeted her with a smile that turned my stomach. "Lane." There it was again. He gestured toward the leather chairs. "Shall we begin?" "Margaret, no." Mrs. Lane sat down calmly. I remained standing, arms crossed, waiting for someone to explain why the name I'd carried my whole life suddenly meant nothing. Holt cleared his throat, sliding a folder across the table. "These are the final documents transferring the estate to Mr. Gregory Lane," he said. "As we discussed." I felt my jaw tighten. Who the hell is Gregory Lane? Margaret didn't flinch. She looked at me with eyes I used to think were filled with warmth now, just mirrors reflecting nothing back. "He's my nephew," she said, "and Richard's rightful heir." "Richard who? My husband," she answered softly. "Richard Lane. He passed away 14 years ago." I stared at her. "You're telling me you were married to a millionaire, lived like you were broke, and let me sell everything I own to pay for your treatments?" She looked away. It wasn't supposed to go this far. What wasn't the lie? Her voice cracked. "You weren't supposed to find out." It took a moment for the words to land. "Find out what?" She closed her eyes. "You're not my son, Jonathan. You never were." The room went still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. She continued, her tone flat now, practiced like a confession rehearsed too many times. "You were 2 years old. Your mother worked for us, a housekeeper named Evelyn Davenport. She brought you to work one day, and I couldn't have children after the accident. I told myself I was saving you from a poor life. I felt something inside me snap, quiet and final. You kidnapped me." I gave you everything, she said quickly, desperate now. "A home, an education, love. You gave me a lie," I said. Before she could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Mr. Price," a man's voice said. "This is Michael Davenport. I'm a retired detective from Austin. I investigated a kidnapping in 1987. A 2-year-old boy named Noel Davenport. I think you're him." The room spun. My knees almost gave out. Holt's pen slipped from his hand. I walked out before Margaret could say another word. That evening, the DNA results arrived. Positive. My name wasn't Jonathan Price. It wasn't even mine to begin with. The flight to Texas was quiet, the kind of silence that lives in your bones. I stared out the window, as the clouds rolled beneath the plane, trying to fit 38 years of my life into a story that suddenly didn't belong to me. The DNA results had stripped everything down to the bare truth my name wasn't Jonathan Price. It was Noel Davenport. When the plane touched down in Austin, a man was waiting by the gate. Thomas Davenport, my father. His hair was white thinner than I'd imagined, his shoulders slightly stooped. But when our eyes met, something unspoken bridged the years between us. He didn't say a word, just walked forward and pulled me into his arms. I felt him trembling, his breath hitching like someone who'd been holding it for 36 years. "She's waiting for you," he whispered. We drove in silence to a small house on the outskirts of Waco, where the front porch was lined with wind chimes that sang softly in the breeze. Inside, the scent of lavender and lemon polish filled the air. My mother Evelyn sat in a wheelchair by the window, her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, I saw my own eyes looking back at me. She started humming before she spoke a tune that tugged at something deep in my chest. "Blue Bonnet Moon," she said, smiling through tears. "I used to sing it to you every night. You'd hum along before you could even talk." I knelt beside her, took her hand, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I cried. Not the kind of tears that come from pain, but the kind that come from finding what you never stopped looking for. Later that evening, a woman arrived carrying a photo album and a nervous smile. Bethany, my sister. 28, a trauma therapist who helped victims of abduction rebuild their lives. "I've spent my whole career trying to help people like you," she said, voice breaking. "I just didn't know one of them was my brother." The next weeks passed in a blur of FBI interviews, paperwork, and news reports that turned our story into headlines. Margaret, no Margaret Lane, was arrested at her home in Colorado. Fraud, kidnapping, obstruction. The fortune she'd hidden was frozen, her mansion sealed. She sent me one letter from county jail. I opened it once, read the first line, then folded it back up. I never knew how to love without owning she'd written. I didn't need to read the rest. A month later, I reopened a workshop in a dusty lot behind my parents' house. I called it Blue Bonnet Repair, for the lullaby for my mother, for the life that had found its way back. Some mornings I catch myself staring at the daisies that grow wild near the fence line, sprouting stubbornly through the cracks in the pavement. I used to think they were just weeds that refused to die. Now I know better. The truth is the same way it breaks through whatever covers it, no matter how deep you bury it. And when it finally sees the sun, it blooms. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and what part moved you most. We love hearing your stories and reflections. Don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy for more powerful true stories about family loss and redemption. Your voice makes this community stronger.